We have two presenters this morning. They're going to give you a double header. So Emma Crichton, chartered civil engineer with 6 years of experience working on projects within the water industry in Scotland, and over 5 years of experience working in the social sector with Engineers Without Borders UK. Engineers Without Borders UK offers various programs directly for engineering professionals, including Virtual Design Challenge Reshaping Engineering and the Global Responsibility Competency Compass, a learning tool for everyday professionals endorsed by the Engineering Council. Within education, Engineers Without Borders UK has delivered the Engineering for People Design Challenge as part of university degrees to 87,000 students since 2011 across South Africa, the UK and the US. Emma is coordinating a systems change lab and led the development of the reimagined degree map with the Royal Academy of Engineering, which is the degree map that we endorsed recently. And the Engineers Without Borders also have a stand out in the main session, the main area, so please go along and see what they have to offer. She's joined by Dr. Jayne Hitt, who's been teaching in universities for almost 20 years across the UK and the US at the Colorado School of Mines. She served as the director of the Writing Centre, director of the McBride Honours Program in Public Affairs, and founding director of a first-year program designed to bring the arts into ethical engineering design and to recruit diverse students to engineering. In 2019, she moved to the UK to become the founding professor of liberal studies at Hereford's startup higher education provider, the New Model Institute for Technology and Engineering, NMITE, specialising in bringing ethics, communication, sustainability, and a place-based approach to the curriculum. Now she also acts as project manager for the Engineering Professors Council Ethics and Sustainability Toolkits. Please join me in welcoming Sarah and Emma to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Incozy UK. Thanks for inviting us here. We both really love being in Edinburgh. In fact, I'm also a visiting professor at Edinburgh Napier University.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emma, and it's great to be home in Scotland and with you all today. How are you, Sarah?
Well, I'm an American. And it's been a pretty intense couple of days, continuing to be. And it has been interesting, personally, to navigate that intensity professionally, alongside preparation for this talk, which I've known for months was going to be the day after the election, but also for the panel we participated in, Emma and I, on Monday night at the Hazards Forum in Manchester, in which we delved into a discussion on ethical practice amid fundamental shifts in technology and society. Therefore, I've been thinking and feeling a lot about systems, political, certainly, but also cultural, technological, educational, even emotional support systems, which are really helping me hang on. So this line of thinking here at Incozy feels quite relevant to our audience today and all the important work that you do. How are you, Emma?
I'm feeling glad, obviously, to be here with you and for you all as well. And over the weekend, I took some comfort and decided to recharge by going for a long walk in Epping Forest in North London. And it really helped me kind of like calm and prepare for today. And it also got me thinking about complexity and the complex systems that are embedded into our everyday lives. Walking beneath the red and orange and green leaves, I was struck by how these trees, though they appear quite simple as you walk around and have inane chatter, if you like me, they're part of intrinsic networks. Underground, trees share resources through fungal networks and even signal to each other in times of stress. This complexity is essential for the forest's overall health, yet it's seamlessly woven into what looks like a peaceful landscape. Darwin's idea of the survival of the fittest isn't about relentless competition, but actually about our ability to adapt and balance within a context. It's our ability to respond to a changing context that helps species evolve. We have complexity, but I would argue that sometimes we have complexity and we overcomplicate it. And if we think about, the apps that we use to navigate around different transport systems, we rely on process and layers of data in real-time schedules, traffic patterns, real-time monitoring, or the microbiome in your guts is a dynamic community of trillions of microorganisms that simply keep me healthy or not. And I think as systems engineers, we can learn from nature's balance and resilience. Just like these natural systems, our human-made systems, our healthcare, our education, our community structures are really interconnected. But sometimes we overcomplicate them. So I think it's really important to embrace the necessary levels of complexity that's required and those characteristics of healthy systems. And a bit like walking around the forest, I was feeling calm and restored, even though it is an inherently complex system. So I think it's a really important considerations in terms of how do we navigate the complexity of today without overcomplicating it.
Yes, and I, in fact, might be feeling the need to go on a long walk in a forest myself. But in terms of systems, I'm actually ashamed to say that I worked in engineering education for probably at least 5 years before I really became aware that systems engineering was a thing that you can take classes in and get a degree in, become professionally certified in, go to conferences with other people who also do it. But that's likely because my educational background is in the humanities and not in engineering. However, I actually think that studying the humanities might give you a superpower in understanding systems because we study human systems, religion, politics, societies, cultures. But this was never framed to me during my education as seeing systems or understanding systems. What about you? I mean, you were educated as a civil engineer a few years ago. What prep did your course give you?
Definitely
for understanding systems thinking or systems engineering?
A fantastic question. So I studied at the University of Bristol and started in 2008, so just after the recession. And we were trained to understand paradigms, what shapes your world views, and how to see the world from different perspectives. It was kind of reinforced continually throughout the degree course. We had dedicated modules on systems thinking and sustainable systems, which really shaped how I approached engineering problems. And for my research project when I was at uni was looking at the impact of sustainable development on the construction industry for 2030. And then kind of laterally in the kind of capstone type period, so the final year design project, was looking at a local school upgrade. And I saw firsthand how design choices can shape the environments that influence learning, that can influence well-being. I vividly remember a really important dialogue on whether or not to have a staff room. And the design code said one thing, and the emotional response from teachers was telling us something else. So it's really about how do we embrace that complexity and let the context in which we're working shape our design decisions. So it's for me, a really powerful introduction to understanding the ripple effect that engineering decisions, that the choices we make as engineers can have.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think those real-world projects that we provide our students are one of the ways in which we can help them see through a systems lens. That module, that program that Andrew was mentioned in my introduction at the Colorado School of Mines in the first year, that was designed to use techniques from the humanities, arts, and social sciences to inform engineering design. And in that module, the first unit we had was actually called Seeing. We essentially spent 2 weeks teaching different ways of seeing and why that's important to engineering practice. As part of our investigation into seeing, we highlighted the seen and unseen systems that lie behind engineered products, processes, and services. Of course, teaching something is one of the best ways to learn something. So in many ways, I was learning about systems alongside my students. But I think I still have a lot to learn, even after many decades working with engineering and engineering education, about what the system of engineering actually is.
I keep being asked a question at the moment, which is, show me the system. Can you give me a visual of the engineering system? So I've had a go. Would you like to see it?
Let's see it.
So It is rudimentary. I'm not a visual artist, so I just want to put that disclaimer out there. But thinking about this Darwin survival of the fittest thing around, what are the evolving needs of today? What are the societal values that we hold dear? What is the context of our global challenges? What are the type of risks that we're facing looking into the future? And what are the evolving kind of needs of humanity within the limits of our planet? That should really be the input or the kind of broad context that we are responding to when we're looking at the design of engineering education, how we practice as professionals working and living in the 21st century, but also what is our engagement with a collaborative network or relationships with our clients, with the communities, whether they're physical or digital, and our stakeholders. And what are we doing in terms of nurturing leaders and people and businesses to evolve the relationships that they hold, but also to be able to respond to this changing dynamic in terms of our global challenges. You can see at the top, I've kind of rudimentarily put kind of the kind of core chunks, some of the core chunks of education: formative education, initial professional development, professional qualifications, and then lifelong learning. And it's this ability to continually learn, to adapt, but also to be aware of the fact that actually we are in a dynamic system. We shouldn't have this piece in the middle getting stuck over time. It should continue to evolve. And in practice, again, it's pretty rudimentary, but thinking about people come in with ideas. The ideas can come from others. It doesn't necessarily have to be those within the system that bring the ideas. And then there's projects, products, service development. They might become educators. They might do research. And those outcomes really impact the world. So it's really important for kind of understanding this system that engineering shapes the world in which we all live. And that world then should shape engineering in terms of how it's set up and designed. And I think there's a really important piece that I couldn't draw, but I would love any suggestions for how to convey the point, is that the kind of connections within this system, so like the cultures of what is seen as normal, can really influence the outcomes that then impact the world. Those cultural dimensions are sometimes hidden pieces in terms of what it feels like to work in an environment, what's seen as normal, those reinforcing pieces. As human beings, we were really influenced by those factors in our decision making. But also if that's the middle kind of system that we've just looked at, then there is governance. Governance is the rules of the system. How do we organize? What does it look like? And enabling process areas. So things that are really important in order for this system to connect, to work, to achieve the better outcomes that we're looking for, to really respond to the needs of society. So again, quite rudimentary, but I put in there, and I put in a lens really looking at, the skills development within engineering of, it matters what the Royal Charters say. What do they say fundamentally about the definition of the role of engineers? It matters what the standards of professional competency look for. It matters what you get asked in those questions in terms of when you step in and you get assessed on your professional qualifications. What are you being asked? What do the people who are reviewing your peers that are reviewing your assessment think is important? What are our skills policy? What do the kind of wider university policies mean when we look at education? And then down the bottom, thinking about those enabling areas, increasing diversity, business development, thinking about digital technology, kind of how do we be able to have this challenge of responding to the changing needs of humanity and our world?
Thanks a lot for that, Emma. I mean, it's a very complicated, the more you think about it, the more you delve into it, the more layers and the more inputs and outputs I think you have to grapple with. But this is a good start for kind of understanding the system for the next, half an hour or so.
Imperfect, but we'll get
Imperfect, but, keep trying.
And I'm very much still learning about systems. I actually chair a trustee board for an organization called Useful Simple Trust. And this has really expanded my understanding of organizational systems. It is an organization that has no human shareholders. So the employees don't own it, nor do any external shareholders. It is about having a shared ethos, and that is the trust. That is what everybody is kind of driven towards. And it is innately complex. It doesn't mean that it takes away some of that complexity. It's actually about embracing it. And it's a B-Corp. And a social enterprise with a team of nearly 100 professionals. It's working across disciplines in different aspects of design. It has balanced gender at every level. It operates for profit, but with a mission-driven ethos across the 5 design practices that you can see at the top. And my role as chair of the trustee board is to come in and look at how do we do an intergenerational transition. And that's shown me firsthand what the complexity is, the importance of kind of the culture within an organization, but also the emotional connection people have to where they work. And I think embracing that complexity paired with like a strong structure and clarity and transparency of how things are organized is essential for a healthy social system.
Yeah. I mean, this different way of working in your business is really is very interesting and novel, because we know that the way that we have been sort of managing or operating in the system of engineering, so the way we have been doing manufacturing, energy supply, water, building, infrastructure, digital, all of that has had amazing, untold, uncountable benefits over the last 50, 100 years, but also has had huge negative impacts, and it doesn't work for everybody. So we know this is an era of transition, the transition from fossil fuel to power human lives, but in a way that doesn't impact our climate and biodiversity. We know we must transition to building the capabilities of people within engineering that can actually question the rules surrounding AI and technology as these different modes become more dominant. We know that we need stronger relationships with communities, both digital, physical, and non-human, probably, to adapt to our changing world. We need a transition in engineering to enable a safe and just future. And in fact, both of us have been working on projects over the last couple of years to help enable that. And we're going to tell you a little bit about that now.
That's right. I've been working to facilitate over 200 educators and change makers. And it's really been an exercise in radical collaboration. What happens when you bring people with shared values who are maybe trying to drive change within their own organizations? What happens when you bring that network together? What happens when you hear about the wider barriers and enablers that they're facing? We really think that that type of space has huge potential in terms of giving insight for how the systems as a whole might evolve.
Yeah, and we've been trying to distill the learning and experience we've gained through this process of working with, students, accreditors, advocates, industry, all working together in this complex space. And we've tried to distill those into tools that support the educators who really shape the future of engineering. Because in order for us to have engineers and other professionals who can see and understand systems and work towards a sustainable future, their education is absolutely paramount.
Which is why we're really thrilled that NCOSA UK is endorsing the reimagined degree map. So this was the output and some of the outcomes that came out of the kind of bringing together that network of change makers. And it really is a guide for educational providers that are preparing and adapting degrees for the graduates that will be graduating before 2030. In the UK alone, over 250,000 people will study engineering between now and 2030. And what we've done is tried to look at what is that process of really understanding what's happening in the world more broadly. What does that mean for the role of engineers? What does that mean for the role of educators? What does that mean for understanding what might be most important in terms of embedding different things within education? And how do you really create a generation of people who are able to navigate the level of change that they're going to experience across their career? So this guide really distills a lot of insights and expertise from research and experience into something that is accessible to a much broader range of people. So it's really a translation tool in order to support university departments to come together and ensure that they're evolving their degrees. You can download the QR, you'll see QR codes on our slides throughout, so you can download the different resources that we're talking through, but we'll also share those as well towards the end. That work for engineers, that board is built on our experience of being within degree courses, running something called the Engineering for People Design Challenge. And this is about a place. So every year we work with a community-based organisation to tell the story of a place. So this year it's Makers Valley in Johannesburg, South Africa. Funnily enough, it's actually just around the corner from Nando's HQ, which I always mention to the students that are participating because it really sparks interest in a way that I didn't think mentioning a kind of chicken shop would do. But what we do is we spend 6 months working with that local community, understanding what's the culture, what's the history, what's the demographics, what do people in that area want, kind of really embrace that complexity of that place, and also bring in different engineering kind of lenses on it. Where does the water come from? What's the energy system like? What's the digital infrastructure? And the students are posed with this open-ended brief, and they work for approximately 100 hours as part of their degree in projects, in teams, to be able to translate, understand that context, and then look at ways that they could propose improvements. So it's a real exercise in helping them understand how do we embrace the complexity of the real world. But what it does as well is it really lands the importance that actually it is about the context in which we're working, the people's lives that we could be shaping, the places in which we work that matter, and that should be what informs the engineering in which we do. So it really has a mindset switch and a kind of switch on for students in terms of seeing their role and motivation to be part of this change.
That's great. Similarly to the Engineering for People Design Challenge, the Engineering Professors Council has been working on resources that educators can use immediately in their classrooms. So we know that there are requirements from accreditation, from industry, increasing sort of pressure and encouragement, fortunately, to bring ethics and sustainability topics into everyday engineering education and practice. But a lot of us who are engineering educators were not necessarily trained in those topics. And so educators need a bit of support, perhaps upskilling, ideas for lessons and activities that can allow them to do that. So the ethics toolkit and the sustainability toolkit have been produced, co-produced with 72 contributors across 3 continents to produce 54 resources that include, as I said, everything from lesson plans, activities, project briefs, case studies, assessment criteria, even just simple explainers. What is engineering ethics? What is engineering for education for sustainable development, and what does that mean for engineering? So the toolkits have, and we've done impact studies actually on the toolkits that really demonstrate their value in teaching. And in fact, based on the success of these toolkits, it is my great pleasure to announce that we have a new toolkit in development. And with the support of Quanzer, we are now developing a complex systems toolkit. So how appropriate I get to announce that today. We are beginning work on developing this in early 2025. I really encourage you to get involved with that. That QR links to a registration form where you can sort of say what level of involvement you might be interested in or want to have for that project. So
that sounds like a first big ask today. Is
yeah. So here's something you can do. You can help us with.
An invitation to get involved
Yep.
With that piece of work and contribute.
Yep.
Fantastic. All of these pieces of the puzzle are built on a belief that engineering education can create a ripple effect that is powerful enough to shape practice for decades to come. In an era of transition, where transition is critical to ensuring a safe and just future, we see the role of education as absolutely fundamental. And that's not necessarily just education for young people. It's about this ability to really land lifelong learning as essential and upskilling as a continuous practice of what it means to be an engineer.
Yeah, and that number you said before, I'm just going to repeat it because it's really important. There will be, in the UK alone, 250,000 engineers graduating from UK universities before 2030. Okay, and that number really suggests not only the impact that those students will have, but also it suggests those pretty significant changes we might need to make pretty rapidly. And from what I know about being an academic, rapid change is maybe not a hallmark of academic life. Education can feel like it moves chronically slowly. In fact, a decade ago, one of my colleagues was still teaching from overhead transparencies that he had had for decades. But on the other hand, as a counterexample, during the pandemic, we changed significantly in 2 weeks, right? So change is possible, and in fact, we might see this in different ways of, it looks like we don't have the order is not what we... So we'll just have to do a little bit of a switch. So in other words, we know that this needs to be systemic.
And when we think about a story of change, it's flawed, as everything. It's not absolutely ideal. But when we look at the purpose of business, the B-Corp movement, so the B Corporation movement, was established in order to try and support businesses to evolve from being primarily focused on financial gain to looking at how they could be driven by purpose. If we go back 10 years, the only B Corp in the UK is a company called Treedom, which plant trees online and follow the story of those trees. So at that moment in time, you would be like, okay, I don't think this is going to be the shift that's happening. But it's interesting to look at what happens next. So through to 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and this is just looking in the UK. And you can see at the top right, like how I've done this assessment. But it's looking at, well, who are the early adopters? So you see some environmental sustainability consultancies looking at how do we become a B Corp? What is the process of doing that? How do we change our structure and our culture and the way that we think about the work that we do? And then you kind of go the way through and you start to see different organizations coming through, architecture companies, communications agencies, the first chartered surveyors, becoming a B Corp in 2020, and then the first UK-based B Corp in December 2020, Use of Simple Trust. So then what happens in 2021 is we see larger organizations. So the stars mean purple is over 50 employees and blue is employee-owned. And you start to see a slightly more mainstreaming group. You can see some kind of civil engineering consultancies coming through there. There's a lot of architecture practices still kind of joining in terms of trying to become B Corps. And these organizations have all gone through that assessment, so they've all been able to kind of go through and come out the other end as qualified B Corps. When we look at 2023, you can see even more people coming through. We've got the kind of design-led interdisciplinary engineering practices. We've got steel companies. And when you think back to, I think it was Treedom, the first organization, kind of thinking about how actually this looks like a much more mainstreaming group of organizations that are driven by purpose. I haven't done the 2024 ones because it would actually fill up the slide too much, but there is 46 organizations in 2024 so far, and even a few real estate companies kind of coming through and trying to shift their business's purpose. So this is a kind of story of change, whether or not you think that this is a signal of wider transformation or not. We can see that actually change can happen pretty quickly in terms of a kind of movement within engineering.
And I think what we need to realize, and we can sometimes think about how engineering has or hasn't changed in recent decades. So similar to how the B Corp movement has changed in recent decades, especially with COVID in the middle, which was a very strange period of time. Was it fast? Was it slow? I'm not exactly sure. But what we can definitely say is engineering today is not what it was even 10 years ago. We've got a little video that can hopefully encapsulate that change. In the interest of time, Emma, I'm going to suggest that we suggest to people that you have a look. It's a minute video, but it's from the Royal Academy of Engineering a couple of years ago. It's called This is Engineering.
So it's a This is Engineering campaign, and it tells the story of what is happening in engineering today, and it's a really great communication tool in terms of kind of showcasing the best and the brightest of engineering today from a whole range of different industries.
And I think the examples in that video, too bad we couldn't see it, but those you know the examples in your own minds, and those should demonstrate that we must adapt, right, to meet these challenges and ethically educating that 250,000 people. But I think to do this we are talking about unsticking the system so that it can be more responsive and more agile and be a little bit faster to make those changes. I personally think that the way to do this is less about technology and more about the people, focusing on the people within the system.
And intergenerational transition, so we think about like who makes up the workforce today, who are the ones that kind of define the cultures in which we work, and who shapes the type of solutions that that exist. Today, these are categories of generations, imperfect, but it does show that there is a different change. And the reason that we're using these categories is to show that people who are raised and educated in different periods of time when the world looked quite different coexist within our workplaces, within our cultures, and if we think about like future generations, like what do the generations in the future look like, we can see that actually it will likely be a kind of similar diversity in terms of different viewpoints and different kind of understandings of the world and the world that they know and have existed in. Just a story through time on this is it's 70 to 75% of the workforce. This is what that group looked like in 2000, in 2010. By 2021, we start to see the group who makes up the majority of the engineering workforce shift quite considerably. And it raises questions of, well, are our professionals in engineering prepared for the work that we do today and making sure it's meeting the needs of people within the limits of our planet? Some stats on the screen there saying that actually of the companies with a sustainability strategy, only 7% of them think they have the skills to meet it. So that is a colossal skills gap of, according to this stat, 93% of companies have a sustainability strategy and don't think they have the skills to meet it. So what we're seeing here is a really systemic skills gap that's really important for us to consider how we adapt and close that. And you might be asking yourself, well, future generation, what's happening with the younger generation, sorry? Will our future professionals be equipped wherever they come from? And we can see that actually the education of engineers has stagnated somewhat. You can see that there is a desire there where 79% of tertiary educational students would like to see more sustainable development within their courses. So they recognise it's important, but we've got some work to do in order to translate that into better educational systems. By 2030, this is the group that will make up the majority of the engineering workforce. By 2040, this is the group. And by 2050, we're seeing a shift beyond. So as I stand in front of you today, I'm 34, and I'll be working, all being well, through to the kind of 2050s. And it is the era of transition. I am pretty nervous about what does that change look like, and will we get to the point where we are addressing the challenges of our age. But I think what's key to that is recognizing that actually we have the power in being able to shape our systems and support one another in order to collectively upskill and close those skills gaps.
Yeah, so we've spent the some of the talk talking about seeing and understanding systems. We've talked about the need for change, and in the last 10 minutes here with you, we're going to talk about systems change. See what we did? And in the use, the power of systems change to set those new norms that are required for transformative learning and transformative practice.
So to see some of those intractable structural changes in the system of engineering, we need to look at how do we evolve education and practice and the way that we engage with the wider world. And I think this requires us to really kind of see the relationships within the system more broadly as well and be able to nurture those relationships as much as we can. This is, again, another imperfect diagram, but it's thinking about, well, Sarah and I work for Engineers.Borders UK. Sarah is working for a portfolio of different organisations. And we have, on the screen is the team at Engineers.Borders, but then also the partners who have got on board with this idea of systems change within engineering. We've got volunteers, we've got student chapters, we've got the National Academy of Engineering, we've got those that set Engineering Council, who sets the UK spec, which is the kind of competency standard for what it means to be a professional engineer in the UK. And also they set the standard for what it means to be an accredited engineering course for degree courses and other educational providers. So it's just thinking, this is a very quick kind of web of like, what are the important relationships here and how do we work collectively on a kind of radical exercise in collaboration in order to shift some of those norms. So the second invitation to you all today, which is to join us in the Systems Change Lab. So this is a network of change makers who come together, focused at how do we evolve the culture of how we teach and practice engineering. And there's different ways of getting involved. So if you sign up, you'll be kind of aware of different opportunities to contribute. And we're trying to be as flexible as possible because we know that not everybody has all the time in the world in order to get involved. But it's really important to see, I think, sometimes this idea that actually there is a wider shift that's occurring, and it's especially important for us to nurture the relationships within the system.
Could you actually go back to the process diagram, one more? So there's a reason why I like this second diagram better than this diagram, and maybe it's my bias as a humanist. Go to the next one. No, sorry, forward.
And we don't have the second one here.
Yeah, no, the next one. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
I like this one. I like this one better because it includes people. Right. The other one had these invisible. There's not people, recognized in the past one. And I actually think this is key. We can feel like systems are so massive, so large, so impersonal, and beyond our sort of power to nuance or change them. But actually, the systems are made of people. And so as a result, we have to look within ourselves to see what we can do. And I think that's true actually within the field of systems engineering. I was doing a little bit of research on just the history and how systems engineering developed. That's very recent fields. It seems to be younger than, certainly my parents. It was in the early 1960s, I guess, this was articulated as a specific discipline, despite work that had been going on since the 1900s and then solidified during World War II. Yet another example of how the profession has radically changed in the last century.
You're right. And I'm an engineer in my family. I'm the only engineer. And the previous engineer in my family was called John. And he worked as an engineer 100 years ago. The machines he worked on were analog. The ones I use are digital, smart, connected. He had pencils and drawing boards and working with people from his local area, Glasgow, Paisley, and I collaborate with CAD technicians all around the world. If I'd been alive when John was working, I would only just have been able to vote, attend university, or join a professional institution. John didn't have a TV, phone, or days off at the weekend. The weekend wasn't, as a concept, mainstreamed at that point. And he was excited by emerging technologies such as roller coasters and fridges. John was proud of the British Empire, at the time covering 24% of Earth's land areas, and today I work to decolonise engineering education. So I think we can see through the stories of people that societal values change, and we need to consider the roles of engineers going forward. I've pulled here some research from Albert Camp in 2020, who was looking at, what are the roles of engineers if we were going to look at the best way that we can respond to today's challenges. And I was really pleased to see that systems engineer is defined as one of the kind of key emerging roles of engineers. So if you think we've got specialists 2.0, people who can look at different aspects of our kind of deep technical work. Systems engineers who can join the dots better to be able to look at those, like how do we work together in order to evolve these problems. Front-end innovators are kind of entrepreneurial, people who can try and kind of drive the way in terms of creating paths of doing things differently. And then finally, contextual engineers. So these are people who I would describe as people in planet first. So they might be based in a local community, and they could work with organizations in order to make sure that that community is able to participate in the design of the engineering that shapes their lives.
And that really resonates with conversation that happened in a focus group that we convened at the EPC around the Emerging Complex Systems Toolkit. Andrew Pemberton, recently elected president, actually raised some key questions related to this. How do those who can navigate complexity talk with those outside of engineering? Contextual engineer? Do we miss out by only looking at traditional engineering routes into systems engineering? Is the concept of systems engineering a separate discipline, or should it be a part of all disciplines? What about its role beyond engineering? How do we retain systems engineers within engineering? Our systems engineers have a role in themselves that act, perhaps, as the glue between the silos? How should we define their role? And again, all of those questions are about people. What role they play, how we organize, and how we work best together.
So to conclude, our key messages are on the screen here in terms of the signals are clear. We must evolve the system of how we engineer. That is absolutely critical in terms of seeing the role that engineering plays in shaping the world and the world then shaping how engineering is set up. This requires embracing complexity. Let's try and not overcomplicate it where we can. And investing in people, not just technology change. And strengthening the relationships between people, communities, and organizations. And finally, whatever age, wherever you're based, especially if you're a professional working in engineering, we all have a role to play.
Finally, our last ask. We are developing a navigators program, which is meant to enable and aid those looking to embed or adopt or become change maker, and use those change maker tools and translate them. So please subscribe to the newsletter here, where you can learn more about when this initiative launches. To conclude, I'm really reflecting this morning that we often depend on or think we need strong leaders to enact change. But in fact, we need leadership and accountability from people at every level. Leaders, yes, they influence culture, but in the face of less than ideal leadership, you can and must still do the work that leads us towards a safe, just, ethical, and sustainable future. And in my last comment, I will say, support your care for your American friends and colleagues today. Thank you, Richard. Where are you, Richard? I don't even know you, and you gave me the biggest hug this morning. So I appreciate that. Thank you, everybody, for giving us the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. We've got time for one or two quick questions. So if you've got one, please put your hand up. There we are.
Hi, I'm Mike Henshaw from Loughborough University. Thanks very much for the presentation, and very interesting. One question I have about the charts you put up was, I didn't see disruption on them anywhere. And actually, I think that's, particularly at the moment, it's really important that we educate to expect and, if you like, rejoice in disruption.
I like that.
It's interesting. So NMIT, the university that I moved to the UK to help start, positions itself as a disruptor and really trying to be a disruptor in the education space. And I will say that that has been harder than we thought, and because of the systems surrounding the disruption. So yeah, agree, but you do have to still negotiate those systems when you're disrupting them, I suppose.
Yeah. Point taken. More disruption. Not a problem.
We've got one more, the last one over there.
Hi there. Excuse me, sorry. Tom Jackson Burton, Nuclear Waste Services. I like the point about embracing complexity. I suppose I spent most of my, or all of my career being told, what you're telling me is too complicated, make it simpler, put it on less words, less. And I think, I don't know how we, as like engineers and scientists, like embrace complexity and yet meet that need for telling people simple messages and stories. I don't know if you had a view or any thoughts on that.
Well, my first job in engineering education was the director of a writing center, which was all about helping engineers and scientists communicate incredibly complicated technical things to the broader public. And it's very, very hard to do. And you're right, it's hard to do, and our education doesn't train people to do it. In fact, it privileges actually the complexity, I think, in education. So I would argue, I think that needs to be embedded within projects, assignments. Yes, write your fancy technical report with all of the very complex details, and also practice talking to people, writing things, and so on. Because, Andrew, we talked about that in the focus group, didn't we, on the absolute need to develop that skill.
And I would say, I think the urge to simplify it to a point where actually we dumb down the understanding of the system, I think is a mistake. But I do think it is important to build the relationships with whomever it is you are talking with, so you understand what are they seeing, what do they want to know, what are they concerned about, what are they excited by, what level of information supports them to get involved and participate and contribute in different ways. So I think it reminds me of when I used to spend time talking to my brother, who does not care about my job, about and it's the level of information I cover, I watch for the eyes glazing over. It's that we get to the point where I'm trying to finesse my communications so that I can kind of engage him in conversation in different ways.
Excellent. Yes, I very much know having to describe the job as drawing pictures like a 5-year-old. So you're not joining us for the whole of today. You're having to leave.
I'll be here for a bit.
But they will be. Sarah and Emma will be around for the break and a little bit longer to and please go and look at the Engineers Without Borders stand and catch up with them, ask some questions. Just a final thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sarah, no.